So let's call up our two authors, Susanna Kearsley. Look at that, she's magically appearing. And Diana Gabaldon. And there she is, magically appearing. So Susanna's in Canada, Diana's in California, and the miracle of Zoom is that we can actually do all this, which I think is great. So before we start, ladies, I would like to raise a glass and toast Susanna. It's been quite a while. And in fact, when your last book published, Susanna, I think you were actually at the Poison Pen with Diana.
Yep, 2018, it was Bellwether, yep.
In the before times when we could actually
in the before times.
Yeah, live events.
And I'll be there again in the after times. Thank you.
Well, we certainly do hope so. So I'm going to turn it over to you ladies and listen in and really look forward to what you have to say.
Thanks.
All right. Can you guys hear me?
Yep, I can totally hear you. Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, I can't hear myself with the earbuds in.
Headphones
So.
in? Oh,
Okay,
okay.
that's better. All right. Okay, well, congratulations, Susanna. This is wonderful. And
Thank
so nice
you.
to see you again, even if not in the flesh.
I know, it's really nice to see you too. I've been looking forward to this so much.
Yeah, well, I enjoyed the book immensely and so forth. And I was wondering what led you to Scotland, as it were, especially Jacobites, and so things like the Act of Union and so forth. I mean, I understand the appeal.
Right.
Have you got anybody to pay you to write about it?
Well, I actually started off, I mean, The Winter Sea, I think, was the first time that I wrote about Jacobites. And that was just chance. That was really just stumbling on one little history book that was about the Franco-Jacobite invasion attempt of 1708 and realizing I'd never heard about it before. I never learned about it before. And then the more I read about it, the more I started wondering why we never heard about it and why we never learned about it. And that sort of led me down that whole rabbit hole of the earlier Jacobite invasions that are not covered so much in the history books. And through that, I discovered the Murray family of Abercairny. And once I discovered the Murray family of Abercairny and John Murray, who became the hero of the Winter Sea, and his brothers and his cousins and Colonel Patrick Graham, who was his uncle, and all these real life characters just kind of stepped off the pages of my research and became very real people to me. And I just, their real life adventures kept leading me into more and more research, which kept leading me into more and more story ideas.
That's kind of how it works. Yeah.
That's pretty, yeah, I'm sure you're really familiar with that. And so I had written The Winter Sea, and then Colonel Graham himself wouldn't stop talking in my head, which and so that led me into a book called The Firebird, which carried on into the Jacobites into Russia. But again, I hadn't realized they had a whole community there. But the Vanish Days was really the sort of germ of the idea started when I found out that Colonel Graham, it was again doing research on that family and finding out that Colonel Graham had applied to collect the wages that were owed to his son Jamie, who had sailed with the Darien expedition, which again was something I hadn't known about, that in 1698, 1699, the Scots had done this amazing venture to found their own colony in what is now Panama. And they had, it was a brilliant idea, fascinatingly brilliant idea to establish a colony where they would bring ships in on the Atlantic side and carry the cargoes across land to ships that were waiting on the Pacific side. And by doing that, they would sort of cut out the trade of the English East India Company and the Dutch East India Company and all these other competitors. And of course, King William, who was both Dutch and the King of England, didn't think that was such a great idea. So he undermined their efforts all the way through. So that was a fascinating episode of history, and the collapse of that venture, which was engineered, deliberately engineered by the king, was what led to, in large part, the Treaty of Union. And because it bankrupted Scotland. It just, you know, so it was that sort of tumble of events that and finding out that Colonel Graham had a son involved in that led me down another rabbit hole that I thought, well, this would be a good subject for a book, and it lets me continue on with my Abercairn people and you know, so that's kind of where that starts. It all starts with a what if and a person that you want to follow. Yeah,
that's right. Oh, that's exactly right. It all comes down to character.
Yeah.
Currently, I'm doing a Surrey panel this year with the topic, you know, what comes first, character or plot.
And what is it? Is it characters for you? That come, it's characters. Always characters. Yeah.
It's always characters. I mean, the plot is what the characters do, so you can't have a plot
right.
if you don't know who's doing it.
But for me, I never know the plot until the characters start moving. I think it's the same for you. Like until like you can think you know certain plot points that they're going to hit, but they may or may not know, they may or may not hit those points, right? You may think that this would be a good thing for them to do, and then they get there and they're like, yeah, no, we're just going to go over here and do this other thing. And it's creating, well, creating seems like a very grandiose way to put it. It's putting the characters on the page and letting them go and then following them and seeing what they do. Yeah.
No, that's exactly how it works for me. I gather there are actually people who will draw up a plot and then try to people it with characters. And I mean, I've read some books that were clearly written on those lines.
Yeah.
You know, if that's how you want to do it, that's fine. But you know, no, for me, it's always character. You know, once in a while I get asked to go and teach at writing as such, you know, basically just to tell people, the elementary school and high school kids, what is it like to be a writer? You know, what do you actually do? How do you make any money at this, etc. And so I just end up telling them everything about publishing and all the things you could do besides write and so forth. But it gets down to, how do you write a story? I said, okay, for me, it always starts with the person the story is about. So let's pick somebody. Who is the story about? Okay, if we're talking fairy tales, let's have it be a woodcutter, you know. Who is this woodcutter? What's his name? They get a name for him. They say, okay, what's he going to do? Well, he's a woodcutter. He's obviously going to go cut wood, right? So he's walking down the path into the forest, and he finds a tree, and he cuts it down. Okay, what happens next? A fairy pops out of it, and it denounces him for cutting down her tree. And you know, and after that, it's and then what happens? And
and that's how a story is. Exactly how a story is built. Exactly. And sometimes when you're writing like a real life historical character, you know some of the things that happen next, but you don't know. There are big gaping holes that you don't know what happens next. And it's your knowledge of that character through what they've left behind. Like in the case of you know, John Murray or his brother Robin, who is in this book, his real life brother, older brother Robin, who left behind a lot of letters and documents that I was able to access. I know some of the things that Robin was doing, but I don't know other things. I know some of his dialogue because in some of his documents, he actually wrote conversations that he had, which are fabulous. He actually, you know, there's a speech that he gives to my hero, Adam, when he's asked to do something that goes against his moral character, and he gives a very indignant speech back, and it's almost word for word what he wrote at the time. And it's kind of nice to be able to put that back, you know, on the page for him. But so I know some of the things that he did and said, but then there are other holes where I don't know what he was doing. So it's your knowledge of his character and what he would have done and might have done, you know, that you just sort of fill in. That's kind of fun. It's like a puzzle. It's like piecing a puzzle. I love puzzles, right? So it's kind of like, yeah,
exactly. And that, of course, is why we do research, because that's where we get the frame of the puzzle.
Right.
You get to design the pieces.
Then you get the pieces, and then you can, you know, then you kind of squish that last little piece in sometimes. Sometimes there's a hole left, but you know. I remember somebody said once that historians get to leave bigger holes because they can just jump, right? They can just say that, you know, you know, follow the facts and say that people were able to last, you know, on a journey if they were going across America with limited supplies, that they made it across America with limited supplies, and the journey took 3 days and stuff. They don't have to explain how, you know, but in a story you can't do that. It's a gaping plot hole. So you have to fill in how that happened and who helped them and who came along and did what and how they made those supplies last for, you know, a limited amount of time, you know. So it's an interesting thing for a novelist to have to work with.
Exactly. So, yeah. But it is kind of a treasure trove when you deal with obscure people and you find letters and journals and things like that. On the other hand, when you're dealing with more public figures, there's a lot more of their actual speech, kept in the historical record. But, that suffers then from the bias of inclusion, who chose what to write down about what they
Who
said.
kept what, and sometimes, sometimes you're also dealing with, like, descendants of the more public figures who don't want their ancestor to be portrayed in a certain way. And I'm very fortunate with the Murrays, that the Abercairny Murrays and the Inchbrakie Grahams, both of whom, like, their descendants are just absolutely wonderful. The Abercairny Murrays still live on Abercairny, and actually have a link to Outlander, which I can't. It's a secret link to Outlander, but I can't tell you. But the Abercairny Murrays still live there, and right where my characters walked and everything, and they also now own Inchbrakie, the estate of Inchbrakie, and so I've been able to go there, I've been able to stay there. They've been absolutely wonderful. They've shared documents. They've let me see the portraits of everybody, so the characters have become even more real than they were before. And but they are, they haven't limited me in any way. They haven't said, oh, you have to make him this kind of character, you have to make him that kind of character, or don't do this. They're luckily, everything I find about their ancestors, they were all really good people. They weren't, I haven't turned over any terrible rocks yet. They've got a couple of scoundrels in there. Everybody's got a couple of scoundrels, but they've got some fascinating people in their background. So lots of fodder there for. I'm not done with the family yet. Got a lot more family members to go. So
some good stuff in there.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. Well, I'm happy to say that I get along well with the present people who hold the title of Lord Lovett, and
that's nice.
And the Earl of Castle Loud. The Earl of Cromarty is his actual title, but he owns Castle Loud, which bears a very strong resemblance to Castle Leoch, and he is in fact the head of his branch of Clan Mackenzie. So,
nice.
Yeah, so luckily none of them have ever registered any objections to what I chose to write about their ancestors. This may be due to
Were you nervous at all before you first met them? Were you nervous when you first?
Slightly, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I didn't know how they would take it, but both of them were enthused, luckily, and and in fact, the Earl of Cromarty, who's now a friend, invited me and to come and stay at the castle. They were about to renovate it for tourism purposes, and so we drove out and stayed with them for 2 days. That was quite an experience. But lovely people, the Earl and his countess and so forth. At their castle had obviously not been renovated since about the late 15th century.
Right.
And while they were about to start, they had a government grant who's showing us the holes in the lead plate roof and wondering how he was going to fix those. So forth. But yeah, no, we got along extremely well.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, it was similar for me, because I never approached the Laird of Abercairny, because I was afraid that, because you're writing about their forebear, and you're kind of like,
Exactly.
what if they think, who is this little Canadian upstart writing about my family? And but what had happened was on Facebook one day, because I'm always looking for something to do on Facebook. I'm very bad at posting on Facebook, and but I guess it doesn't matter today. But on Facebook I was having a really terrible time, and I noticed that Abercairny was still operating as an estate, and that they were doing weddings, and I thought, oh well, my readers would really like this. So I sort of took that and I posted it up, and I said, oh well, if you like the Winter Sea and John Murray, then you might want to follow at Abercairny. And I posted up. I thought, there, done and dusted. It's my post for the day. And
Yeah, good job.
and I went to bed. I didn't think anything of it, and I guess overnight they got a lot of followers, and everybody on my post was sort of saying, oh, I love John Murray, I love the Winter Sea, it's my favorite book. And they were probably wondering what is going on. And then a couple of days later I got a little message, a little private like ping message, and it was like, hello Susanna, my name is Daniel, and my wife is Anna Murray, and she is a direct descendant of William Murray, who was John Murray's brother. And I'm like, oh darn, it's just, and we've read your book, The Winter Sea, and it turned out they liked it, thankfully. And that started this, and they are very interested in family history as well, and the history of the family and of that period. And so they've been nothing but helpful. And every time I go there, they and their children just, I'm loaded into the car and I'm driven wherever I want to go, and all these places I would never have thought of going. And I get taken around a lot of, now every time I go, we'll be going out to various battle sites and everything, and looking for different things, and everything we're going by now is, oh well, that Outlander was filmed over here, and Outlander was filmed over there, and this church they used for the Outlander for something, and it's really quite funny. And everybody was very impressed that I knew you. They were extremely impressed up in that section of Perthshire that
I'm very flattered.
But it's beautiful countryside, absolutely beautiful countryside. So I keep looking now on the show. It's like, I know that church. I know that church. I know what scene happens there.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, the thing is, they can only film within 90 miles of where the studio is, because that's
right.
1 day's journey there and back for all of the trucks that you need to take in order to film anything. Because they had asked, the Castle people, the Castle Loud, had asked, could they maybe come and film at Castle Loud? And I said, I'll suggest it to them, but I don't think so. Anyway, they said, well, no, he's way up in Dingwall. No, there's no way we could get up there. So they built Castle Loud instead, or borrowed Castle Doon.
There's that beautiful little church at Tippermore that, where the battlefield is and everything that they used. And it's just, well, it's nice for the tourism of the area as well.
Absolutely,
Really fun.
Yeah. Let's see. Have you contributed to Scottish tourism? Do you know?
I don't
actually.
Oh, I think
carry people.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people have gone. I get an astonishing number and a gratifying number of emails from people and private messages from people that have made it up to Cruden Bay and Aberdeenshire for the Winter Sea seemed to resonate with a lot of people. That so people send me messages saying, I'm here in Cruden Bay, and having sticky toffee pudding at the St. Olaf Hotel, and doing all these things, having a pint at the Killie, and so it's kind of nice. So I'm doing my little part. And for the Vanish Days, the action takes place in a real life National Trust building that I renamed for it's actually Gladstone's land on the Royal Mile, but I called it Caldo's land. So they have holiday flats there. And I stayed in the flats for like a few years running. So not continually, but I went back again and again and again into the same flat. And it was really neat. The first time I did it, it was fun because it seems like a really good idea the first time you do it. You think, oh, this is fabulous. This is like this, 15th century building, the 16th century building in the Royal Mile. And it's one of those old little tiny narrow turdy houses. And it's a tenement going straight up, and they've got it made into a beautiful museum on at that time it was like 2 floors with museum, and now I think they've done the 3rd floor, and then the rest is little holiday flats that the renting of the holiday flats helps fund the property. So I thought, well, I'll stay in the holiday flat, and then I'll be writing in the building that I'm researching and setting the book in. That's a great idea.
Yeah, great.
Which seems like a fabulous idea until the museum closes at like 5 p.m. and everybody leaves, and you're there by yourself in this like 16th century building in the middle of the Royal Mile in the dark by yourself, because there was nobody else in any of the holiday flats except me, and it was a little spooky. But I'm here to tell you that if there are any ghosts in Gladstone's land, they're entirely friendly, because nothing bothered me the whole time I was there. So I saw 1 mouse and no ghosts, and everything was lovely. And they have up getting up to the holiday flats, there's an old stone turnpike stair, and it's just a beautiful place. But anybody that wants to get a feel for what that place is like, you can actually go to the setting. And when I was staying there, I went down one level into the museum and walked into the museum, and one of the portraits on the wall looked really, really familiar. And it turned out it was Captain Thomas Gordon, who is one of the characters in the book.
Yeah.
So I thought, well,
That's
definitely the right place to be writing about. Yeah.
You bet,
So,
absolutely.
yeah. But
Yeah,
it's
well-
just a stone's throw from the castle. So it's a good place to stay.
It is, yeah. Yeah, one of the other things that I like so much about your books, and it's also research-based, is that you know so much about the actual laws of the period and how they would apply. And you used one to good effect, you know, with the woman trying to get her husband's, you know, her essentially post-mortem benefits, but not
Right.
being able to prove he was dead,
Yeah.
or not
It
being
was.
able to prove she'd been married to
She'd
him.
been married to him. Yeah, because
Yeah.
it was just tricky. It's not, it wasn't easy. And it was a difficult thing, because that was one of the things that the English did just after the Union happened in the spring of 1707. There was a lot of unrest in Edinburgh because it had been kind of snuck in sneakily, this Union. And there were a lot of people not happy about it. And
Mhm.
the English sent up the equivalent money. It was called the equivalent, and it was designed to pay off a whole lot of things. Mostly the lords who had voted for the Union in Parliament, but it was also the story was that it was designed to pay off, you know, a lot of different things. But they were paying the wages as well that were owed to the sailors that had died in the Darien expedition. So people had to come forward and claim them and say that you were, you know, you were the rightful heir of soldier X or sailor X. And the Company of Scotland that had been behind the venture had kept very meticulous records, and the sailors and soldiers who had gone on the expedition had left, you know, little receipts before they went saying who their heir was going to be. So you just had to kind of match up with that thing. But there were occasional cases where there was no proper receipt, or where the person had, you know, left a receipt, and then you know, someone else came forward and said, well, I'm his wife, and yeah, it doesn't match up. So there were always these cases of people coming forward and pretending to be someone they weren't. And there were, you know, there were forgeries and you know, famous forgeries and stuff coming forward. And so that was something I uncovered in just researching, you know, different things, scandals. People were talking about it in their correspondence back and forth to each other, saying, you know, so and so was in prison for forgery and coming forward and doing this. So it became and of course John's brother all this time was quite conveniently in jail in Edinburgh for you know, not really, he didn't really do anything. He was just taken up because the authorities wanted John. So they were trying to get John.
Bait, yeah.
He was bait. Yeah, it was pretty much bait. So that all seemed again like a really good germ of a story for me.
Well, as you look into things, suddenly
Yeah,
something comes along and it just falls in.
It does. It does.
Start happening.
Yeah. Hello, Barbara.
Barbara's among us
Hi,
again.
I have a couple of questions that I wanted to ask you.
Yes.
One of which is that this book is called by your wonderful publisher, Source Books, the third in the Scottish series. And we've talked about the Winter Sea, but Diana and I were trying to remember last week when she was signing, you know, hundreds of books for Outlander fans. We were trying to remember the title of book 2. Which I now know is called the Firebird.
Well, series are okay. So series are tricky things, because series to me are constructs of other people, right? Unless, I mean, like Diana controls her own series. Like she sets, you know, she knows the order of her books and she makes them the way she wants them. I write books and people configure them into series. And what happened was I wrote The Winter Sea, and then I wrote what I called a sort of sequel to The Winter Sea, which was Firebird, because Firebird had different, I write dual time stories for, you know, like, so Firebird had different modern day characters, but the same historical characters. It just continued the historical story. So it wasn't a true sequel. It was like a sort of sequel sort of companion novel, and you could read them in order, or you could read them out of order, whichever way you wanted to. But on Goodreads, where readers like to put things in category, readers like to categorize things and put them properly on their bookshelf a certain way so they know how to find them, they created a series called the Slains series because Slains Castle featured in both things. So that was a reader construct, wasn't me. So they said, so
startling.
yeah, so they called it the Slains series. And I don't interfere with what readers do. So
No,
that's the readers wanted to call it the Slain series. It was the Slain series. So this book I call The Vanish Days is a sort of prequel, sort of companion book, because it has overlapping action with the Winter Sea. Part of it happens in 1707. It's a dual time, but the present day is in both sections are in the past. There's no modern day timeline. So, right. So like both sections are in the past. The one section is in 1707, taking part at the same time as a lot of the action of the Winter Sea with a lot of the same characters. I mean, like Colonel Graham is he's mentioned weaving in and out. Part of it goes backwards, and you see some of the characters that you're later going to see in the Winter Sea and the Firebird and stuff, like John, John's brothers, John's cousins. So there are connections. So it's a sort of companion book, like, there are connections, but it's not a straight prequel, and it's not a straight, it doesn't come like 1, 2, 3 straight order, but it's written, I wrote it after. So my publisher has decided that because Slains isn't in it, they're going to retitle the whole thing the Scottish series. And since this is the third one they're publishing, they're calling it number 3 in this. So I just stay out of it. I just write the books because technically you could, I would argue that A Desperate Fortune is like a satellite book of the Scottish series, right? Because Anna, who is in the Firebird and sort of the Winter Sea, is in, like, she makes an appearance in A Desperate Fortune. The Vanish Days has links to Bellwether. So it's hard with my books though, because I don't intend for this to happen, but what happens with my characters is once they're on the page, I don't really have any, or off the page, I don't have any control over what they do. And Diana understands me. they just are. They're wandering around back in here somewhere. And I'll be writing another book, and what happens is they just wander back in. And there's a character in this book called Gilroy. And he came into the book and he started doing his thing. And I was several chapters into the book before I figured out where he connected in my, Susanna verse, where I was like, oh, I know who his parents are now. I know where he comes from. But it took me that long to figure out where he came from. So one day somebody, and I know it's going to be a reader and not me, because there's no way my mind would be able to do this, but some reader is going to do one of those boards with yarn and figure out where all my characters go and what books they wander into and everything. But so the Scottish series, the Slain series, whatever you want to call it, these 3 books are connected to each other, but you don't have to read them in any order. They're not it's not like the Outlander series, where you really do want to start at the beginning and build all the way through, because that's like, Outlander is like building a castle. You want to start with the bare ground and build up through the foundation and then start putting on the ornamentation, and otherwise you don't know what the shape of what you're looking at is.
Mhm.
And it's, whereas with mine, it's like you can walk over here and pick this rock up and just look at it. And, you know, it's not going to affect the other rock. It's more like reading Anthony Trollope. It's just you're all in one big village and the characters are going to walk into one house or another house, right? So
Right. Well, I love your answer, but in truth, I asked that for a really mundane reason, which is I just thought that people who were not new to your work would like to know there are other books that you might like to read. My personal acquaintance with Susanna, and still my favorite book, is The Shadowy Horses, which takes place in Northern England. And at that time, Susanna's books were published in the UK, not here in the US. And we used to import them, a lot of them. And I kept thinking, you know, at first I hadn't read it and I began to wonder why we were selling so many copies of this amazing book. So I did read it, and I'm not going to spoil it for any of you, but Susanna does something that I really approve of in The Shadowy Horses that you don't often meet in historical fiction. I love it. It's a missing Roman legion. We're in the north of England. Has nothing to do with what we're really talking about here, but what a great book. And all of her books are wonderful. Dragons were in Wales, right?
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, you know, she tours us all around. Now, my other question, which I really wanted to ask you, I'm familiar with Diana's writing process, which is, I like to think, unique to Diana. Diana probably likes to think it's unique to Diana.
Yep.
And it involves writing scenes and then working out connective tissue and eventually figuring out a shape. She can describe it better than I can.
Yep.
But Susanna, you know, are you a more linear writer? Do you, this is a question that I know people are going to ask, so it's just easier to ask it now. Do you begin at the beginning and kind of motor to the end, or do you have a more, do things just sort of happen and you piece them together?
I'm a mix. I'm not as, I don't have the kaleidoscope. I would say I don't have the kaleidoscope that Diana has going on. But I do get pieces. I have the puzzle. We both have this sort of puzzle. The puzzle analogy is great, you know, where you find the edges and then you're filling in the middle. I get the first line first. That's when I know I have a book. I'll start to see the characters first. It's usually I see the characters first, and I don't quite know where they fit. And then I get a first line. And when I get a first line, I get the voice of whoever's speaking that first line. And then they just start talking more, and I start taking notes. And sometimes the scene that I'm seeing is not the first scene of the book. The first line usually is. It's close to the first part of the book. In this case, the first line was the very first line of the book. But sometimes it's like midway down the first page or in the first chapter or whatever. But what'll happen is that I'll sometimes get a scene intact that belongs towards the end of the book. And I know that it's going to happen towards the end of the book, but I don't know how I'm going to get there. So I just write it down and stick it away and write towards that. But I tend to write linearly towards that and then just sort of leave it over here. If I get stuck, I just take a bath or go for a walk or, you know, do anything. I don't tend to jump around in the writing because with my mind, what usually happens is something will come out of the next something. Like I don't, the next scene comes out of the scene that I'm writing now. And if I jump too far ahead, the scene won't be the same. The development won't be the same. So it's just I guess my stories develop more like movies in that way. But sometimes I see a preview, and you know, or I see a teaser, a trailer of some scene that I don't know quite what's going to happen yet. It's like you know, when you're looking at things for or like a TV series and they show you a little glimpse of what's going to happen next week and you don't quite know what the whole show's going to be yet, but you know that you're going to get there. that's kind of what my process is like. It's very
And
visual.
I
Yeah.
shouldn't have spoken for you, but I was trying to introduce a little background there. So
Yeah.
do you want to mention briefly your own process?
Who, me?
Yes.
Briefly,
Oh,
sorry.
okay.
That's a terrible
That's
joke.
all right.
I apologize.
No, but it's neat. It's neat.
No, yeah. No, essentially, I don't work with an outline and I don't write in a straight line. I write where I can see something happening. And what I need to write on any given occasion is what I call a kernel, which is a visual image, a line of dialogue, scrap of music, an emotional ambiance, anything that I can see or sense concretely. And especially one that comes with words. You know, if I think of a phrase or description or a line of dialogue while I'm thinking of this, then that's where I start, is with that. And so I write that down and I sit there and stare at it. And I start fixing it up, moving clauses around, replacing the adjectives, taking out the adjectives, putting in an adverb. I love adverbs. And generally messing around with it. And meanwhile, the back of my mind is kicking up questions like, where are we? Where is the light coming from? What time of day is it? Who else is in the room? That sort of thing. And one of those questions is going to sort of bring it to life, and I can write the next line. So it just proceeds by this little sort of, it's not exactly a dribble, but a continuing gradient, let's say, of idea and dialogue and so forth. And when you can hear the people talking, then it gets much easier.
Yeah, but it's like that. It's like when I stop, it's because I can't see. That's like, to me, that's when I get blocked, it's because I don't know what I'm looking at. I'm blind in the book, and I find those are the places where I need to go do more research, because I'll be literally almost standing in the middle of a field or standing in the middle of the street, and it's like or at a table and looking down at a plate going, I don't know what I'm looking at, and I have to go find out. And that and I'm very tactile. I like to have my this is my fidget widget. This is in the book for anybody that's reading the book now.
Yeah.
That belongs to Captain Gordon. And these actually do come from Leith. They're from the mid 1600s. So you can look back and see those. And then I like to have the actual thing around me. So I will show you something that I'm not going to explain what it is, but you will see it later on in the book as well. So I have this as well. Let's try to get it closer so you can see. But I have that as well. So, I like to have my little things, and I like to hold them and feel them while I'm working. And sometimes I get, inspired by just holding this stuff as well.
Well, we all know, since Diana's going to be reading from it, what her next published book will be, which will be publishing in November, the end of November, if all goes well. But Susanna, before we switch to reading from bees, what is it you're working on next? Because we're just getting to Vanish Days here, but that's a process that you completed some time back. So I'd like to
November,
leave the readers with the hope that there's a work in progress.
Oh yeah, there's always a work in progress. It just takes me a long time. But I am working right now. I'm not ready I'm way not ready to let go of my Murrays and my Grahams. So instead of going forward with them, I am going backward with them. And I am taking them back to 1612, to the year that, King James the 6th and 1st is on the throne, and his son Prince Henry, who was King Charles I's older brother, has just died under mysterious circumstances. And Prince Henry's closest companion, closest servant, was in real life Sir David Murray of Gorthy, who was an Abergavenny Murray. And he was also a poet. And my hero in the book is a created hero, Andrew Logan, who is being sent up. He's a messenger. He's one of the King's messengers, which was a group of men. They're still around, the King's messengers. There can only be so many of them, and they are one of the oldest branches of the service, and they carry the king's messages, and they also were the people that were sent to apprehend people as well. So he is being sent up from London to Scotland to fetch back Sir David to London, and things are not going to go as planned, because they never do with an Abergavenny Murray, and that's where we start. But I can tell you that Andrew Logan is a forebear of one of your favorite characters, Barbara, who is Robbie from the Shadowy Horses.
That's wonderful news, Susanna. And for those of you who are wondering what you're going to read while Susanna's writing this book, I want to recommend an author that Diana and I both really enjoy, Dame Denise Mina, who has just written an astonishing book called Rizzio, which takes you back to Mary Queen of Scots when she was married to Lord Darnley, who's a real, I won't say a bad word here, but nonetheless, that's who he is. And she's pregnant, and there is a really terrible murder in Holyrood Castle. And it's a wonderful book. So that's something you could read to kind of prep yourself for what Susanna has to say.
That is actually, King James once said that murder was the reason that he grew up with his fear of, like, not fear of, but his dislike of blades, knives, because of the murder of Rizzio. And I will leave it to you to discover why.
Oh, I'm sorry, Susanna. I've been asked to repeat it. Her name is Denise Mina, M-I-N-A, and the book is called Rizzio, R-I-Z-Z-I-O, because the murder victim is David Rizzio, who was a companion to Mary Queen of Scots. Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.